Get in your car, head to the plaza, pull up in front, shop, and head home. Some Arcata activists are challenging that paradigm.
The City Council recently declared a climate emergency. The leading source of emissions in the city of Arcata and in the whole region is transportation, in particular driving personal vehicles. We have to start designing our streets and our city for active modes of transportation, stop designing it primarily and explicitly for cars.
The Arcata-based Coalition for Responsible Transportation Priorities wants to create a more people-friendly plaza by either eliminating some parking, by lowering the speed limit to roughly 5 miles per hour and giving pedestrians the right of way, or by prohibiting cars on some of the plaza's 4 streets.
Places that don't have cars in the middle of their pedestrian malls or whatever, you see a lot of people because you may have several thousand that are living in this really small area in the downtown. We don't have that. We don't have the density to support a pedestrian plaza.
But downtown Arcata's density is increasing, driven in part by state and city policies designed to increase housing and combat climate change. In 2013, the City Council removed limits on how many units could be built on downtown parcels. That same year, in order to discourage driving, the state changed the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. Previously, if a proposed development was likely to cause traffic congestion, developers would have to, for example, widen the road to ease traffic. That requirement incentivized sprawl and long commutes because it was easier and cheaper to build in outlying areas where individual intersections would show less delay resulting from new development. The new rules ignore traffic jams. Developers must now fund upgrades only if the project increases total miles driven by residents. The new rules incentivize infill development because downtown residents either use public transit, active transportation, or drive short distances to work, shopping, and services. If the project does induce additional driving, developers can fund bike lanes, bike parking, wider sidewalks, and other amenities that reduce driving by making alternative transportation safer and more convenient. The state and city's promotion of dense development housing residents who don't drive much came under fire last summer, when the city approved downtown Arcata's first 4-story housing project. Beginning in 2022, roughly 100 low-income residents will live at this 7th and I parking lot at the site of the old Isaacson car dealership. Construction of the 45-foot-tall building will follow the 2012 construction of the Plaza Point Apartments a block north.
We were assured during that planning process that seniors weren't going to have cars, they were going to walk, they were going to take the bus, it wasn't going to be an impact. But that's not been the case. The parking lot is full, and the overflow has been in the neighborhood.
On a regular Friday, Saturday night, it's incredibly difficult to find street parking. It feels like people are going to start having to camp overnight to get a parking space.
Plaza Point provides 20 on-site parking spaces for 29 units. The Isaacson building will provide roughly 15 spaces for 44 units. That's 20 units more than the city would have allowed before it lifted limits on downtown density.
It's also, frankly going to displace people who, are employed in the area now that park where that building is going to be built. They're going to feel that pain and they're going to be hunting for a space just like everyone else. This is, in fact, one of the city's strategies for travel demand management and promotion of alternative transportation methods is by making parking inconvenient. This is an alternative transportation project. It has more alternative transportation measures than any project has individually installed and probably ever will install in the history of the city.
Those measures will be funded by a state program that tries to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by funding infill housing projects whose residents use alternative transportation. The city will use more than $2 million of grant money to upgrade bike crossings and bus stops, install car and bike shares, a lit pedestrian crossing, and a transit priority signal that turns green for buses. The city will upgrade the sidewalks connecting Isaacson to the transit center, will add a bus line and an electric bus.
There's also a somewhat innovative program that we came up with that will require that the project provide bus passes to all the residents that live there.
That pilot program replaces the old practice of allowing developers to bypass on-site parking requirements by paying the city to develop public parking. Instead, developers now pay for the bus.
Right now we have kind of this chicken and egg scenario where the buses aren't convenient enough for people to completely rely on, but the ridership isn't enough to add more bus lines.
The pilot program will theoretically overcome that catch-22 because even if tenants don't use the passes, developers still pay for them, funding more frequent bus service and new bus lines. Ideally, those convenience upgrades will attract more riders whose fares will be used to service even more locations more frequently, and so on. By making riding the bus and active transportation safer and more convenient, city officials hope to lure Arcatans out of their cars and into climate-friendly transportation. But to spark that shift and to make downtown more people-friendly, some activists say the city must redesign the central piece of the puzzle, the plaza.
If you look at it from the air, most of it is devoted to cars, parking and driving. We introduced the idea of a normative shield, and so in particular when it comes to 9th Street, which is behind me over there, often called Bar Row because of all the bars along it, this row of cars that's parked as well as driving cars in between create a visual barrier and a physical barrier that separates the kinds of activities that are considered acceptable in the two spaces. So while in this big open area, you might have kids playing, you might have people hanging out, doing normal pro-social activities. If you have folks who are drunk, using drugs or whatever, and they're able to dominate that space behind the cars, in front of the bars, they're separated, it creates a new norm there that's not diluted and not challenged by the more pro-social activities that we want to see. If you were to pedestrianize 9th Street so that there weren't that area of cars parked and driving there, you would really dilute that norm that's developed there.
There's already a lack of parking around the plaza. A lot of people don't want to go to the plaza because they can't find parking. Sales are down significantly. In the last 3 years, it's dropped about 10 to 20% each of those years. So we are down about 40% from 2015. And so if there's less parking, or if they can't drive right up to the business that they want to go shopping at, they might not come. It could be an even further reduction or a death blow for a lot of our small businesses.
The downtown area does not have an impacted parking situation. I think folks that come to businesses and want to park right in front of the business they're going to will feel like there's a parking problem, because that's not likely to happen. But often you're not more than a couple of blocks from where your ultimate destination is, and that's a completely reasonable distance to expect someone to have to walk from their parking to their ultimate location. Even the Uniontown Shopping Center across the street, if you had to park out 20, 30 rows from the shopping center, you're probably about a block away from your ultimate destination, the Safeway.
That's fine for me, a young abled person. The parking lot is a smooth, maintained area with very few curbs. The plaza is bumpy. We do have several customers who've been coming in for years and years who say that crossing over there on 8th and G is really tricky because there's planters. The crosswalk itself is short and off-center from 8th Street. It has a very big dip in it that fills with water in the smallest of rains. I think that a lot of older people, if they have to park that far away, might just keep driving, go home and look online and see if they can find it there instead.
We have an expectation that we can drive wherever we want, park right in front, but in fact, you can't design a city or any other landscape around that principle. When you try, you end up with things like Broadway and Eureka. You end up with landscapes that nobody likes, that are dangerous to move around in, that are congested, and that take up way more space providing parking for cars than actual buildings for living in or doing business in or whatever. We're providing free public car storage in our public space, everywhere. And if it's free and easy and convenient to store your car wherever you're going, people are much more likely to drive.
More than 80% of survey respondents say they access the plaza exclusively or primarily by driving. To reduce that number, Colin Fisk proposes turning some plaza streets into woonnerfs.
The concept was sort of pioneered in the Netherlands. We also call it a living street, that you sort of eliminate the traditional distinctions between the sidewalks and the driving lanes and the parking areas and the benches on the sidewalk and all that kind of stuff. And you kind of make one big space where pedestrians have the right of way, but you can still bike, you can still drive, you can still do all those other things, but you're going to have to go really slowly. You can have street art there, you can have trees planted, you can have performers, you can have wayfinding signage. We can devote it to outdoor dining, public art, maybe play structures for kids.
I want people to slow down, get outside, walk around, explore their environment. I would love for people to come just hang out on the plaza, but it would take a complete redesign of the plaza. The plaza would have to be smoothed or leveled. The inside area with the trees and grass is not ADA compliant, where the paths are inside the grass. If they lead off curbs, then those make it difficult to maneuver around the plaza as a pedestrian. There would have to be parking just outside the plaza so that people could leave their cars there and then walk onto the plaza.
The city does not plan to build a downtown parking garage. Parking advocates say the parking crunch will intensify if and when this lot is developed at 7th and H. If some plaza parking is eliminated, the city's Plaza Improvement Task Force recommends creating new parking on 8th and 9th Streets off the plaza. At 8th Street on the plaza, merchants and farmers want to increase pedestrian safety and access to shopping. In November, they asked the city to prohibit cars on that block during the main farmers market season. That same month, sensing momentum towards year-round plaza pedestrianization, a plaza landlord issued a warning.
We don't have the infrastructure of the bus system, where, like San Francisco, where it comes every half hour, 15 minutes, or whatever it may be. I'm asking not to get rid of cars. If we want to do that, our businesses in the downtown, they aren't going to survive.
On February 19th, the City Council will discuss the Plaza Improvement Task Force's recommendations for improving the plaza and the separate pedestrianization proposal. Activists say Plaza Point, Isaacson, new alternative transportation amenities, better bus service, along with city and state policies promoting dense infill housing, are creating an urban core that demands a pedestrian-friendly town center. In addition to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by making parking and driving inconvenient, the activists say pedestrianization will attract new downtown shoppers by removing parking's normative shield and expanding the inner plaza's pro-social vibe to Bar Row. Parking advocates say by inconveniencing shoppers, pedestrianization would drive a nail into the coffin of an already teetering plaza economy. Eric Black, Arcata News, Arcata.